Tonight, we begin with a military development that Pentagon officials had feared, NATO commanders had anticipated, and Kremlin strategists had dangerously underestimated. A strike campaign that unfolded not over weeks or months, but in just 48 hours. 48 hours that left Russian logistics in ruins. 48 hours that exposed the fragility of Moscow's supply network. 48 hours that demonstrated Ukraine's growing precision strike capability in ways that have fundamentally altered the battlefield calculus. What Russia attempted this week, pushing massive resupply convoys toward the Eastern Front, crossed a line that Ukrainian commanders had been waiting for. And when those convoys rolled into range, Ukraine did not hesitate. They responded with precision, with coordination, and with devastating effectiveness. 340 trucks, gone. In 2 days. For several months now, there had been signals not from official government briefings, not from formal military communiques, just signals that Ukraine was preparing something unprecedented in its long-range strike doctrine. Ukraine has been resourceful, yes, but they have been methodical in their resourcefulness. Their strikes have followed a certain pattern, a rhythm, almost a predictability that Russian air defense planners had begun to anticipate. But what set off alarm bells in Moscow this week was that the pattern went silent. Intelligence analysts who monitor Ukrainian military activity know the indicators. The movement of mobile launch platforms, the repositioning of ammunition stocks, the unusual communications traffic between frontline commanders and rear echelon coordinators, the sudden operational security tightening, all of that went quiet. And whenever Ukraine goes quiet, it means something is about to get very, very loud. Russian military planners should have recognized this. They should have delayed their convoy operations. They should have dispersed their logistics assets. But they didn't. And that decision, that miscalculation, cost them 340 trucks in 48 hours. Early Tuesday morning, NATO surveillance assets detected what they described as unprecedented Ukrainian strike preparations, including the activation of missile systems that had not been deployed in this configuration in over 6 months. These are the kinds of weapons that Ukraine only uses when they are signaling something very specific. Strategic intent, operational confidence, or battlefield dominance. Western observers didn't know which category this fell into or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Ukraine was changing its operational posture. And when a nation at war shifts posture without public explanation, even by the smallest measure, every intelligence agency pays attention. What followed was a masterclass in coordinated precision warfare. Ukraine didn't just launch missiles. They launched a synchronized campaign designed to cripple Russia's ability to sustain frontline operations. The first wave targeted convoy staging areas. The second wave hit fuel depots. The third wave struck the trucks themselves, caught in the open, moving along predictable routes that Ukrainian intelligence had been mapping for months. The warning issued by Western defense officials tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Source after source, briefing after briefing, described Russia's logistical exposure as critical, unsustainable, and perhaps most importantly, self-inflicted. But military superiority only works if the enemy hesitates. Russia did not expect Ukraine to strike with such force. In fact, Ukraine's response this week was among the most concentrated logistics targeting operations we've seen since the war began. Here's what we know. Within 6 hours of detecting the Russian convoy movements, Ukraine launched coordinated strikes across 4 oblasts. These weren't the improvised drone attacks we've seen in previous months. These were precision-guided, long-range missile systems that Ukraine only deploys when they are preparing to reshape the battlefield. The missiles used included domestically produced variants that Western analysts had only recently confirmed were operational. Ukraine didn't just respond. Ukraine sent a message. Tonight, multiple intelligence sources confirmed that Ukraine launched precision strikes on Russian supply convoys, including a massive logistics hub near Mariupol that had recently been reinforced for what analysts believe was a planned spring offensive. Ukraine struck before Russia could disperse. They hit convoy assembly points. They hit fuel tankers that were preparing to refuel armored columns. They hit ammunition trucks that were likely carrying artillery shells for frontline batteries. In other words, Ukraine targeted the circulatory system of Russia's military operation. The arteries that keep tanks moving, artillery firing, and infantry supplied. This is what made Western analysts' assessments so urgent. Russia's logistics push wasn't just routine resupply, it was preparation for escalation. It represented the kind of buildup that could have shifted momentum if left unchecked. And Ukraine, understanding that fully, responded with overwhelming force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't target civilian infrastructure. They didn't strike randomly across the border. They hit military logistics. They hit supply chains. They hit the trucks that would have delivered death to Ukrainian cities. And they did it with precision that has left Russian commanders scrambling to understand how their operational security failed so completely. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Western intelligence agencies now believe that Russia's latest logistics push was designed to test the responsiveness of Ukrainian strike capabilities after months of ammunition concerns. Russia wanted to see whether Ukraine would ration its long-range missiles. They wanted to see whether Western supply constraints had degraded Ukrainian operational capacity. But instead, the opposite happened. Ukraine didn't conserve. Ukraine unleashed a strike campaign that was so comprehensive, so precisely coordinated, that even Russian military bloggers acknowledged the damage. You don't get Moscow's attention easily. But this week, Ukraine did. Defense analysts speaking with Western media under anonymity described Russia's convoy losses as catastrophic, a word rarely used in official assessments. 340 trucks is not a setback. 340 trucks is a logistics crisis. Each of those vehicles represented fuel, food, ammunition, medical supplies, spare parts, the lifeblood of military operations. And Ukraine proved this week that they remain both capable and willing to sever that lifeline. Their strikes were not only accurate, they were sequenced so precisely that Russian air defense couldn't respond effectively to any single wave before the next one arrived. That sequencing matters because it shows sophistication. It shows that Ukraine is not merely reacting to Russian movements. They are anticipating them. They are planning around them. They are defeating them before they can achieve their objectives. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of Ukraine's response. Long-range missile units carried out strikes on at least 7 convoy routes, forcing Russian commanders to halt all major resupply movements for 18 hours. Drone units targeted fuel depots that had been restocked in the last 72 hours, indicating real-time intelligence integration. Artillery batteries operating near the contact line reportedly destroyed secondary logistics vehicles that had dispersed after the initial missile strikes. This wasn't just interdiction. This wasn't just harassment. This was systematic destruction. This was logistics warfare at scale. And logistics warfare at scale is the one thing Russia has struggled to defend against since February 2022. For every supply line they have established, Ukraine has found a way to cut it. For every depot they have built, Ukraine has found a way to burn it. For every convoy they have assembled, Ukraine has demonstrated the capability to destroy it. The numbers speak for themselves. 340 trucks in 48 hours. That's more than 7 trucks per hour. That's a convoy destroyed every 90 minutes. That's a rate of attrition that no military can sustain. Remember, Russia thought this would be over in 3 days. They thought Kyiv would fall without a fight. They thought Ukraine's military would collapse. They thought the West would lose interest. They thought sanctions would be lifted within months. They thought Ukraine would run out of missiles, out of drones, out of will. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. Ukraine is striking deeper. Ukraine is striking harder. Ukraine is striking with weapons that didn't exist in their arsenal 18 months ago. And Russia is losing trucks faster than they can replace them. This is not what Moscow planned. This is not what the Kremlin expected. This is the reality of a war that Russia is slowly, steadily, undeniably losing one convoy at a time. What makes this moment so critical and so dangerous is that Russia's logistics failure happened at a time when Vladimir Putin is under extraordinary internal pressure. Military hardliners want escalation. Economic pragmatists want negotiation. Regional governors want their soldiers home. Oligarchs want sanctions relief. The Russian public wants an explanation for why a 3-day operation is now approaching its 3rd year. Putin is balancing these demands while watching his supply trucks burn on Ukrainian roads. And when leaders in that position face humiliating battlefield losses, they don't respond with restraint. They respond with desperation. They respond with escalation. They respond with the kind of reckless decision-making that makes this conflict more dangerous for everyone. That's why what happened this week matters beyond the truck count. It matters because it puts pressure on an already unstable leadership structure in Moscow. It matters because it forces Putin to explain to his generals, to his allies, to his people, how Ukraine keeps winning these engagements. And it matters because desperate leaders make dangerous choices. The Pentagon statement, now circulating through diplomatic channels, was designed to signal that the United States is not willing to let Russia's logistics failures destabilize the broader conflict. Defense officials said plainly that Russia's convoy operations were inconsistent with any genuine interest in de-escalation. That is diplomatic language for Russia was preparing for a major offensive, and Ukraine stopped it. You don't usually hear that kind of clarity from official Pentagon statements unless something significant is at stake. NATO officials echoed similar assessments, noting that Ukraine's strike capability has exceeded what many alliance planners had projected for this stage of the conflict. The message from Western capitals tonight is unified. Ukraine can defend itself. Ukraine can strike back. And Ukraine will continue to receive the support necessary to do both. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed his nation in a brief but powerful speech tonight. He said, "Every truck we destroy is ammunition that will never reach Russian artillery. It is fuel that will never power Russian tanks. It is supplies that will never sustain Russian occupation." He said, "Our forces have proven once again that distance is no protection for those who bring war to our land." And he said, "To those who believed Ukraine would weaken, look at the fires burning along Russian supply routes tonight. That is our answer." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a wartime leader who understands exactly what this week's operations mean for the trajectory of this conflict. Ukraine is not just surviving. Ukraine is winning the logistics war. And in modern warfare, logistics is everything. Here's what makes the situation even more significant. Ukraine's strikes weren't isolated. Along with the long-range missile campaign, naval drone units also targeted Russian supply ships in the Black Sea. Partisan forces reportedly disrupted railway lines in occupied territories. Cyber units increased attacks on Russian military communication networks, targeting logistics coordination systems. All of this happened within the same 48-hour window. When Ukraine moves multiple capabilities at once, it means something larger is underway. This wasn't a single strike. This was an integrated campaign. And integrated campaigns require planning, coordination, and intelligence that suggests Ukraine's military has reached a new level of operational sophistication. Military analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Ukraine is preparing for a major counteroffensive and needed to degrade Russian supply capacity first. Another is that Ukraine is attempting to force Russia into defensive positions by making offensive logistics impossible. A third possibility, the one generating the most discussion in Western capitals, is that Ukraine is demonstrating to both Russia and the West that they can sustain long-range strike operations indefinitely. That third possibility is the most significant. Because if Ukraine can consistently destroy Russian logistics at this rate, the entire calculus of this war changes. Russia cannot advance without supplies. Russia cannot hold territory without logistics. Russia cannot win a war of attrition if they're losing trucks faster than they're losing soldiers. And this week, Ukraine took that reality and made it undeniable. They didn't wait for diplomatic intervention. They didn't rely on Western pressure. They didn't hope for Russian restraint. They struck. What we're watching now is a test of endurance. Russia wants to see whether Ukraine can sustain this tempo. Ukraine wants to show that they can and will. NATO wants to prevent this conflict from spiraling into broader confrontation. And the world wants to see whether conventional military capability can truly defeat a nuclear power's invasion. Tonight, Ukraine provided one answer to that question. Not a final answer, but a significant one. Tonight, we've heard from intelligence officials who are now monitoring Russian logistics movements in real time. They say Russia has halted major convoy operations across the Eastern Front. They say Russian commanders are demanding additional air defense assets to protect supply routes, assets that don't exist in sufficient quantities. And they say Russia's decision to concentrate trucks in vulnerable staging areas was likely driven by pressure to accelerate offensive timelines, pressure that came directly from Moscow. But Ukraine is not backing down. In fact, Ukraine is intensifying surveillance of remaining Russian supply routes. Their response this week, swift, coordinated, and devastating, sent a message to Russia that logistics convoys are no longer safe anywhere within strike range. And it sent a message to Western allies that military aid is being used effectively, efficiently, and strategically. As the week continues, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Russia hoped to achieve with this logistics push. But what we do know is that Ukraine's response was timely. It prevented a potential Russian offensive buildup. It demonstrated long-range strike capabilities that will force Russian planners to reconsider every future operation. And it reinforced the reality that Ukraine can fight this war on its own terms. What happens next will depend on what Russia does in the coming days. If they attempt another major resupply operation, this week will be remembered as a warning they should have heeded. If they pull back and reassess, Ukraine has already shown they are prepared to strike whatever comes next. They have shown they are ready. They have shown they are capable, and they have shown they are not waiting for anyone's permission to defend their homeland. And tonight, for the first time in months, Russian logistics planners appear to be paralyzed. The supply routes are quiet, too quiet. And when Russia's logistics are quiet, it means they are recalculating. It means they are reassessing. It means they are trying to understand how Ukraine knew exactly where those convoys would be, exactly when they would move, and exactly how to destroy them. Because tonight, Russia learned something they should have learned long ago. Ukraine sees everything. Ukraine strikes precisely, and Ukraine does not miss. This story is far from over. But tonight, one thing is clear. 340 trucks will not reach the front lines. The ammunition they carried will never kill Ukrainian soldiers. And the war Russia thought they would win in 3 days just got longer, harder, and more costly. We will be here, watching every detail as the next phase unfolds.